All right. In thinking through conducting formative assessment, so we're going to talk through a couple of different activities. We're going to talk through different kinds of tools. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start us off by talking through different types of activities. So there's pre and post in class assessments. I'm actually going to go through each one of these a little bit more in depth because I think that things like chunking do not explain themselves well, but that's what we call it. So pre and post in class assessments. So this is typically when there's a predetermined set of questions that are aligned with the lesson's outcomes at the beginning and at the end of class. So we see a lot of institutions using the pre-test results to inform their approach for that day's lesson potentially, and then using the post results to decide if and how to move forward in the next class. So think about formative assessment not as only helping to shape or modify the exact 1 hour, course that you're in, but think about it more broadly than that and how you can use it to impact or change the next interaction that you have with those students. Knowing that a course is, however many for however many, semesters or weeks long. Muddiest point. So at the end of the class, you're going to ask students to write one thing they're unsure of before they walk out the door. So responses could be jotted on slips of paper. You've probably heard of this before. They could be sent to you electronically over an app. Lots of different options for this. Chunking. So this is, not, it's probably not something that easily defines itself, but you could divide a long lecture into chunks. So 10 minutes or 15-minute chunks and deliver a few questions to check in on your students' understanding of important concepts after each section. So if the concepts are properly scaffolded, this is going to allow you to pause and re-explain if needed before you move on to the next concept. Group quizzes. So delivering a pop quiz. You could do one question at a time, and again, you could do it on an online app. There are ones that display the answers to students. There are ones that only show the answers to the facilitator. You can also use a group quiz in a way to conduct a group discussion around students' thought processes as they considered each answer choice. So, you can go a lot of places with a lot of these methods. There's also the 3-2-1 response. So this is students providing 3 things they learned, 2 interesting finds, and 1 question they have as the result of the course that day. Oops, sorry, I just took us back a slide. Empty outline. So this is when you provide a limited amount of time to students to complete an empty or partially completed outline of a fill in the blank here. Maybe it's a concept map, maybe it is a table that you reviewed earlier in class, and they're kind of fulfilling the other half of that outline. There's also focused listing. So focuses on students' attention on a single term, an important term, right? Like a name or a concept from a lesson or a class session that directs students to list ideas related to whatever the focus is. A couple more here. We have word themes. So word themes are all about asking an open-ended question over, an online app potentially. I'm doing a lot of online app examples here, just knowing like the culture that we're in right now. But if we were in class right now, we can also think about doing things with sticky notes, pieces of paper, whiteboarding. There's a lot of different options, but specific to online, for word themes, you can ask an open-ended question on an online app that creates a word cloud to spot themes for discussion. This is really actually a particularly valuable approach for building community in a group of students who are not familiar with one another and might appreciate knowing there are others in the room who potentially think the way that they do. So using word themes to create word clouds. multiple grading opportunities. So this really allows students to turn in an assignment as many times as they would like, so long as they meet with you or potentially a tutor to discuss feedback and review areas for improvement. So this approach really allows you, as well as your students, to see the development that can come when learning continues beyond the assigning of a grade. We also have one sentence summaries. So this is asking students to provide you with a one sentence summary of what they've learned at the end of each class period. So this might be something like, what was the main point that you took away from today? Or what was the most surprising concept? What are questions that have not been answered? What's the most confusing area or topic that was reviewed? Or what's one question from the topic that potentially you might see brought up in the next class. That one is kind of related to the 3-2-1 or the muddiest point, just kind of a different name for it, a couple different prompts. Benchmark course evaluations. So this is what we're thinking about. This comes up a lot. So we really think about, why wait until the very end of the semester to get feedback from students on what's working in the classroom? So you are able to kind of devise your own very low stakes course evaluation to administer at benchmarks throughout the course. Really be sure that if you do this, you're reflecting on the importance of student feedback. You're letting them know that you're taking into account the feedback that they're providing, and you're making changes based on what you've heard or based on what the students have taken the time to share. Then we have self-assessment. So this gives students the opportunities to reflect on their own learning and articulate strengths as well as areas for improvement. And then minute paper. So this is an overview of the most meaningful things that had been that the student or the learner essentially learned during that course or that session. So again, I'm going to take a brief pause. I'm going to launch a poll. If you aren't, all right. So thank you for everybody who responded. It looks like it's a pretty clear distribution of what people are going to participate in. The pre and post assessments are definitely looking like the most popular option for those that want to participate. I do see we have a couple of questions coming in. One of the questions was around, first of all, can you get a copy of the PowerPoint, excuse me? Yes, of course. I am going to ensure that you all have a PDF copy of the slides today. I think I went over that at the beginning, but again, I very well might not have, because remote life and just a lot of things going on. So of course I'll provide a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm also going to provide a lot of other resources. Somebody else has asked, can you give another example of how 3-2-1 might be done in an online course? Would students share their observations in a discussion board or privately to the instructor? That is a great question, and something that I'm actually going to take us into right now is talking through a little bit of examples about LMS, things that we can do, things outside of the LMS that we can do. So I think I'm about to answer your question, which was a great one. All right, I'm going to end this poll so that you all can see my screen again. And I'm going to come back and answer questions again too at the end. So I want to be very clear by stating first that I do not work for an LMS system. I know you all have Canvas. I'm not incredibly familiar with all the ins and outs of Canvas, but I do know that within the LMS, there are ways to create polls. There's ways to create surveys. There are assignments that you can leverage in a formative assessment manner. Many course management systems also have the ability to capture information about the quantity and the quality of participation. So definitely things that you're going to want to potentially look at in your Canvas environments. As far as discussion boards go, a lot of what we were talking about in our examples, especially the 3-2-1, can be something that can be brought up in discussion boards. Now, again, my familiarity with Canvas isn't great. Some LMS discussion boards have a way that students can almost like upvote things or agree with others, thread on other people's comments. So definitely encourage you all to to take a look at those discussion boards. The polling works kind of similarly to how you all are looking at my polls and GoToWebinar, so doing those quick kind of check-ins. Also thinking about outside of your LMS system. So there's email, of course, you can do independent emails to yourself. I also have a couple of institutions that, believe it or not, leverage Twitter. Most students have a Twitter account already. They might just have them hashtag, their course and, a specific hashtag that they're using. And then there's a lot of free software, which I'm going to go through a couple of examples now. So discussion boards are a great way to do it. I know that in my experience in teaching, I used a lot of discussion boards. And as we talk throughout, the next 10, 15 minutes here, I'm going to talk a little bit more about discussion boards and how to leverage them, especially in even group formats and settings. Free software. So I'm going to go through, these are some of the most popular free software available online right now. The first one is Google Forms. Now, I will start off by saying that um, these are free items that are available. You might have to provide your email address potentially to use some of them. A lot of them have limits on how many you can use them. And also, these are just ideas. Again, I work for Campus Labs, so I can't explicitly promote any one of these too heavily, but Google Forms, this is a great way to create forms that you can share information on. You can, in Google Forms, there's hyperlinks, there's images, you can add videos, you can even use them for surveying or quizzes. You can encourage your students to interact together in Google Forms. I'm not sure if you're a Microsoft campus now that I'm thinking about it, but if you are, you can even use the Teams functionality for videoing for different group chats. We have a lot of institutions that are currently doing that. Poll Everywhere. So this is a really good one. This is a real-time polling app that works with a mobile device. You can even use it with Twitter. Or you can use it in a regular web browser. So kind of like the polling function that we're doing today in GoToWebinar, only in an app outside of, a tool like GoToWebinar. Then we have Socrative. So this is a free web-based service that lets you assess students with really prepared activities or on-the-fly questions to get immediate insight and information. So again, I'm going to provide I'm going to provide you all, of course, with the PowerPoint. So if you're feverishly jotting these down, don't worry too much because I'm going to provide again the information after this. Next, we have the Kahoot. Now, I don't know if any of you have used Kahoot before. I've used it in a couple of different instances, but it is a very popular free class quiz game that lets teachers use multiple choice or sequencing questions. What's really nice about this is it creates a little bit of competitiveness. Now, I don't know if that's something that you all want to encourage in your classroom environments, but it is something that we have even used in the office to encourage and do a little bit of a gaming aspect. You can have it give scores and do a ranking board and things like that. So that's something that's a little bit different that we see institutions using. And then we have Plickers. So Plickers is a simple app that really lets you all as facilitators collect real-time formative assessment data without the need for student devices. So by student devices, I'm talking about like clicker systems, right? Clickers are great, especially if you're in the classroom, but now we know we're all off-site and online, so those aren't really an option anymore. So Plickers is a really great app, again, to real-time formative assessment data without needing student devices. So again, accessing from a web address online. And a lot of these will have customizable links that you can then, use and incorporate into your LMS if you are interacting with your students in that way. That is a really great way that we're seeing faculty members provide information to their students. And then there's one that I actually really like that I didn't put on here, and I will add it before I send the PowerPoint out to you all, but it's actually a word cloud app. It's just called wordclouds.com. But essentially, I know in one of my examples earlier, we talked about theming and having word themes. And essentially you can ask for, one word from your students, and you can generate a word cloud based on their responses. If you're not familiar with word clouds, the response that gets the most, or is repeated the most, becomes the largest on the word cloud. So that is another good one that we've seen faculty members interacting with. So if that's of interest to you, again, I'll give you these different examples, but these are a couple that we've seen institutions kind of use successfully. Now I'm going to get into 7 highly effective questions. So again, thinking about formative assessment, and thinking about checking in with students throughout the cycle of the course. So these questions were actually developed based on research and experience of our partners at IDEA. So for those of you who are not familiar, Campus Labs and IDEA are kind of partners. So the Idea Center was really established in, oh man, I think it was like 1975, if I'm not mistaken. And they developed the Idea student rating system, and it was made available to other colleges and universities. So over time, they really established a very specific course evaluation that multiple hundreds of college and universities have interacted with. And then over time, the feedback from the different colleges and universities were added to create a benchmark, and provide assessment and improvement of, different administration performances. So essentially, it's like a large benchmark for course evaluations that has been around since 1975. So our partners at IDEA came up with these seven specific highly effective questions, and these they suggest to use in a feedback manner. And by feedback, we're pretty much saying formative assessment. So I'm going to go over the 7 questions, but first I kind of want to go through. This piece here. So 6 of the questions are focused on high impact teaching practices. So they focus on the strengths, and what the students are perceiving are going well during the course. They also reflect on the feedback of areas that need improvement and adjustments for the next class. And then they also focus on when faculty see an upward trend of improvement. So they are then more likely to gradually work to improve teaching throughout the semester. Then there is a single question on a student's overall perception of the class, and just very blankly, did they understand the material? Now, for each one of these 7 questions, there is a full online article around, or white paper around each one of these questions that identifies and gets into further explanation of why these questions are so effective. And these are all around our students. So of course, before we start asking these questions to our students, we as facilitators, as faculty members, need to think about how we're currently performing in each question area. So we're looking at the list of questions here. I want to go and dig into, I think maybe looking at time, maybe 1 or 2 of them a little bit further. So the first question here is, the faculty member essentially displayed personal interest in my learning. So ways to incorporate this in an online space. At the start of an online class, ask students to share a brief introduction of themselves with other members of the class, maybe using the webcam if that is available. If your class is a little bit larger, organize the class into small groups to facilitate more interaction. You can even think about integrating different types of discussion boards into the class to promote interaction between peers. You can establish open areas for everyone's participation, or you can do private group areas for working teams. Um, Lots of different opportunities here, obviously. And as a faculty member or facilitator, you are able to then kind of pop into these different areas. So things that work well, again, are things like discussion boards in your LMS systems. Even potentially different types of Google Forms. You can really encourage your students to look for connections also between course material and their personal and professional interests. We see that a lot on discussion boards as well. Another approach is even to ask students to find like websites and other online resources of relevance to the course and the material, using some kind of social bookmarking service. So lots of different options here. And then let's look at another one. So let's look at faculty member. So essentially highlighted the importance of student, excuse me, of subject matter. So that's going to be the third one here. So examples of this. So showing real world connections or talking through real world connections and involving students in activities that inspire creative applications. So we want to think about how they're both grounded in, theory and also motivational design. So things like this might be case studies, simulations. These are going to offer students the opportunity to be actively involved in solving what we would consider, real life or open-ended problems that have the potential for provoking extensive research and discussion, even amongst peers. So when we're thinking about these 7 highly effective questions, again, I'm going to send you guys the materials that go over each one of these questions in depth, why it is effective, how you can leverage it, and how you can build it into your course. This can even be something that you're building into a poll and you're doing 3 times throughout your course or 4 times throughout your course. But again, before we do that, we want to do an intake of how we are currently performing in each one of the question areas, because boy, wouldn't it be discouraging if we did this and found that, our students weren't feeling the way we felt about the course. And that's not even a bad thing, right? This is all about learning. It's all about being informed so that you can make decisions to enhance the student's experience, and also to help them progress throughout their course experience. All right. So before we close for the day, I want to go over just one more topic area, and this is acting on feedback and the recommendations. So really, no matter what approach you use, we went over a lot in LMSs, outside of LMSs. We went over, all different types of formative assessment use cases, but it doesn't matter which one you use. Formative assessment is a really great way to support your efforts as an educator. You are then able to meet students where they are. You're going to be more you'll be able to more clearly see their potential for learning and at the same time evaluate your own teaching process. Now, in thinking about this, you want to really focus on the growth and improvement. First, don't take any kind of feedback as, negative or punitive. This is all about growing. And I know that's kind of hard, right? I mean, even as when I do webinars like this, there's always feedback about, something to adjust or tweak or modify. And it can kind of feel a little bit like, well, I spent a lot of time on that. But at the end of the day, it's like, I'm going to make that change and that adjustment because that's the feedback I received. And I looked at this 800 times, but I'm sure there were still there were still things that could have been added, modified, and improved. And I'm just going to take that as a growth mindset and I'm going to make the adjustments. So in adopting a growth mindset, for yourself, for your colleagues, we're able to really look at our current progress. We can look at our past performance. We can focus on improving specific teaching methods and skills. So maybe you know that there's a skill or an area or a method that you want to focus on, then focus on that one piece. So in thinking about being goal oriented, so focus on learning and improving. This, of course, takes willingness to take risk in teaching, right? You are being exposed to have more feedback about adjustments and changes that you can make as a faculty member. And that can sometimes be like a squishy, kind of not great feeling to have that risk in being a little bit more open like that. It does require you, though, to be just that, open to feedback and open to making changes and adjustments. It also requires persistence with intention to make improvements. So again, all about that goal orientation. You also want to think about participating in active reflection. So reflecting on and taking your actions to change. So this is all really important part of kind of the formative assessment process. So you can have an expertise in any skill, and or any practice, but you also want to have intention to continue to improve. So you all, potentially have been educators for many years, and this might be a new way to receive feedback for you all. So in thinking about that, we want to think about a couple of suggestions. So we want to think about asking for a second set of eyes potentially. So looking at our student feedback, we might ask a trusted colleague or even a partner to look at some of the feedback with you and sit beside you as you review some of the observational feedback that you're receiving. Focus on one course at a time. We talked about this earlier. You might be teaching lots of courses. Don't think that you need to go and look at your 10 courses and think through the rest of this semester, looking at the fall semester, and think about how you're going to incorporate this into every single one of them. Start small, get a feel for it, find out what tools work for you and that your students are responsive to. Limit the factors you're looking at. So really focus on a limited number of teacher behaviors or course features at a time. So don't go and look at everything you've ever done. Just focus in on maybe, again, those methodologies or skills that you're working to improve. Focus on improvement. This is all about improvement. It's all about seeing improvement in your students and their satisfaction with your course. And that's not everything, right? It's also about us being improving as educators. And then investigate new methods. So in response to feedback, investigate maybe new teaching methods and strategies. Connect with your colleagues or your program chair or others in your department to see how they are maybe getting through to students if there are some areas that maybe students seem to be struggling in or with. Final recommendations, and I have a lot here, and I'm looking at time, so I'm actually going to walk through these a little bit more quickly than I had intended to. I really can get to talking sometimes. So some recommendations: setting clear criteria. So keep the criteria clear for what defines a good performance. Encourage self-reflection. So ask students to utilize uh, their own course criteria, or maybe even to evaluate themselves, or ask them to evaluate a peer's work and share what kinds of feedback they found most valuable. So it's okay to try something and then say, hey, did this help you all? And reflecting back on this assessment that we did, was this helpful? What could be more helpful, right? Give students detailed and actionable feedback. So provide, this is important, consistent, specific feedback tied to your previously established criteria. Um, so that's a really good one to keep in mind. Encouraging dialogue between your teacher, yourself, and your students, between peers, talking to one another around learning, and of course, providing a space where students can reflect on the course, as well as provide instructor feedback to um, to establish a rapport with your students, right? And then also just think about being able to promote positive motivational beliefs and self-esteem. Now, this one's kind of hard, right? Students tend to be more motivated and engaged when they are assured that an instructor cares for their development. Depending, again, how many courses we have, how many students we have, that can be difficult. But an example of this can be really as simple as an instructor allowing for a rewrite or a resubmission to signal that an assignment is designed to promote and develop learning before there is a final grade associated with it. Also provide opportunities to close the gap between current performance and desired performance. And then finally, looking at evaluating information. So it's great to collect a lot of this information and participate in formative assessment, but you also need to move forward with analyzing the information, evaluating it, and then making the adjustments and modifications moving forward. All right, everyone, we've come to the end of our session today. I have one last poll question for you. And it's all about formative assessment. It is a multi-select if you are able to respond. Please do. And then as you all are taking a look at that, I have a large amount of resources that I'm going to be following up with you all on. So I'm going to be providing this information to Marnie, and Marnie and I will work to get it all out to you all. So that's going to include the continuous improvement worksheet we saw earlier. It's going to include the learning outcome worksheet we saw earlier, a PDF of the PowerPoint materials, more information on the 7 highly effective questions, and lots of additional links to different resources that I use to put this session together, both online, or actually all online mostly, and a couple of references to some of the books and theories that I talked through today. All right, and it looks like you all are very, very fast at responding to polls. So the question today is, formative assessment is, please select all that apply, conducted before the learning experience to provide feedback. It's conducted after the learning experience to provide a grade. It is used to help faculty improve their teaching methods, conducted during the program to monitor student learning. So the 3 that I would associate with formative assessment are the first one, conducted before the learning experience to provide feedback. I guess I could have been a little bit clearer in my survey question. I was thinking with this one, conducting before the learning experience to provide feedback to potentially the faculty member ahead of time, maybe based on a previous course. And then used to help faculty member improve their teaching methods, absolutely. And then conducted during the program to monitor student learning. Of course, it can also be conducted after the learning experience to provide a grade. So technically it can be all 4 of these, but your answers are really interesting. When we think about it, it could be any and all of these. It is also going to depend on our comfort level with formative assessment and the way that we want to engage with it. So keep in mind that there's lots of different methods of formative assessment, but you don't need to engage in all of them. Find the ones that work for you and that work for your students. That piece is important.